The radio crackled with static, then silence. 4 Navy SEALs pressed their bodies against the crumbling mud wall of a compound in Helmand Province, surrounded by Taliban fighters who had emerged from the poppy fields like ghosts. The extraction helicopter had taken an RPG through the tail rotor 20 minutes ago and corkscrewed into the mountains 6 clicks north. Now the team was alone, ammunition dwindling, and the enemy was closing in with methodical patience. Staff Sergeant Marcus Vale keyed his radio one more time, voice steady despite the blood seeping through his pant leg. "Any station, this is Reaper 1 Actual. We are danger close, taking effective fire from 3 sides, 1 urgent surgical. Request immediate CAS. Over." Nothing but hiss and the distant thump of mortars walking closer. The youngest SEAL, Petty Officer Rodriguez, was barely 23 and had been in country for 6 weeks. He looked at Vale with eyes that had aged a decade in the last hour. "Sarge, they're not coming, are they?" Vale didn't answer. He didn't have to. The Taliban had chosen this spot deliberately, a kill box far from friendly lines during a sandstorm that grounded every rotary wing asset in the region. Fixed wing couldn't see through the soup. Artillery couldn't get coordinates. They were alone in a way that made the word feel like a coffin lid closing. Then, cutting through the static like a blade, came a voice. Female. Calm, almost bored. "Reaper 1 Actual, this is Hog 2-3. I've got your position. Stay low. Danger close is my specialty." Vale blinked. "Hog 2-3 negative. Visibility is near 0. We have no marking smoke. You cannot possibly." "Didn't ask for smoke, Reaper. I can see your muzzle flashes. And there's 30 seconds." Rodriguez stared at the radio like it had spoken prophecy. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog ugliest plane in the arsenal, designed for one thing: killing tanks and saving infantry. But in this weather at this distance, without forward air controllers, without laser designation, it was suicide. "Who the hell is that?" Rodriguez whispered. Vale shook his head slowly, listening as the sound began to build in the distance, a low growl that rose above the wind, above the gunfire, above everything. It was the sound of 30-millimeter cannons warming up, the sound of a plane that refused to quit, flown by someone who had apparently decided that impossible just meant no one competent had tried yet. The name on the mission roster would have meant nothing to them then. Captain Alara, Revenant Cade. She was about to become a legend. The A-10 emerged from the dust like something prehistoric, wings leveled despite winds that were shredding visibility to mere meters. Inside the cockpit, Alara Cade's eyes moved in constant rhythm across her instruments, hands steady on the stick and throttles. She had flown through worse, though not by much, and never for stakes this high. The Warthog shuddered as another gust hammered its titanium bathtub of a cockpit, but the plane held true. It always did. That was the thing about the A-10, it forgave you when nothing else would. Her heads-up display was almost useless in the storm, radar return cluttered with ground scatter and false echoes, but she didn't need it. She had trained for this, planned for this, lived for this. Close air support without the comfort of clear skis or perfect coordinates. Real war, messy and desperate. "Reaper 1, confirm you are north wall of the compound, Taliban forces advancing from east, south, and west quadrants." Vale's voice came back tight. "Confirmed, Hog. They're within 50 meters on the south side. We've got maybe 2 mags left per man." "Copy. I'll take the south first. Keep your heads down, and I mean buried. My gun doesn't know friend from foe without geometry." She banked hard left, dropping altitude until the ground effect turbulence rattled her teeth. The A-10 wasn't graceful. It was an angry, loyal dog, and it would tear apart anything threatening its pack. She armed the GAU-8 Avenger, the 7-barrel rotary cannon that was less a weapon and more the entire reason the plane existed, with the jet built around it as an afterthought. 30-millimeter depleted uranium rounds, each the size of a milk bottle, 70 per second. She toggled her radio to open channel. "Guns hot in 3, 2, the cannon roared. Even inside the insulated cockpit, the sound was apocalyptic, a vibration that lived in your bones. The plane slowed midair from the recoil, nose dipped, and Alara compensated with instinct older than thought. Below, the earth exploded. Taliban fighters who had been advancing in a loose skirmish line simply ceased to exist, replaced by geysers of dirt and shredded vegetation. The distinctive BRRRT sound echoed across the valley, unmistakable, terrifying, beautiful. She pulled up hard, engine screaming, and circled back. South side neutralized. Give me east quadrant positions. Rodriguez, pressed against the wall, watched chunks of mud rain down around them and felt something close to religious awe. The Taliban fighters on the eastern flank had frozen at the sound, that deep mechanical roar that signaled death from above. But their commander was screaming at them in Pashto, gesturing wildly toward the sky. They raised their AK-47s and PKM machine guns, firing blindly into the dust clouds, hoping for a miracle or at least revenge. Alara saw the muzzle flashes bloom like fireflies through the haze. She adjusted her approach vector, coming in lower this time, dangerously low, so close that her landing gear nearly clipped a stone wall at the compound's perimeter. The Warthog's twin General Electric turbofans howled, and she toggled her weapon systems, fingers dancing across switches worn smooth by 1,000 training runs and 100 real ones. Reaper, heads down, east side servicing now. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 sang again, a 2-second burst that sent 140 rounds downrange, each one capable of punching through concrete. The enemy position disintegrated. Men, weapons, and cover became indistinguishable from the landscape. She pulled up into a climbing turn, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat, and keyed the radio. East side clear. West quadrant, talk to me. Vale's voice was steadier now, touched with something that might have been hope. West side has a technical, mounted heavy machine gun, approximately 70 meters out. They're using it to pin us. A technical, the universal weapon of asymmetric warfare, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun welded to the bed. Fast, mobile, deadly. Alara grimaced. She had Mavericks, AGM-65 air-to-ground missiles slung under her wings, but firing them in zero visibility was asking for collateral disaster. No, this needed precision. She came around again, searching through the murk, and there, a flicker of movement, the dark outline of a vehicle. She armed her Hydra rockets, unguided but devastating in the hands of someone who knew angles and wind and lead time like breathing. Reaper, danger close west, I'm going kinetic. Cleared hot, hog. She pickled off 2 rockets in quick succession, white trails carving through the dust, and watched them impact half a heartbeat apart. The technical erupted in a fireball that briefly cleared the air around it, black smoke boiling upward. She didn't wait to admire her work. The A-10 was already wheeling around for another pass, searching for threats, for movement, for anything that might harm the men below. Marcus Vale allowed himself a single breath of relief and keyed his radio. Hawk 2-3, you just saved our lives. How long can you stay on station? There was a pause, long enough that Vale felt a spike of worry. Then Alara's voice came back, quieter now, stripped of the professional detachment. I can stay as long as you need me, Reaper. I'm not leaving until you're out. Rodriguez glanced at the sky, still choked with dust and wind, and muttered, Who is this person? Vale shook his head. I don't know, but I'm buying her a drink when we get home. Above them, Alara checked her fuel gauge, her ammunition counter, her engine temps. She was running on fumes and stubbornness, but she had been running on those for years. The truth was, she had almost not been here at all. 6 months ago, she had been grounded, paperwork and politics and old men in boardrooms who thought women couldn't handle the stress of close air support. They had pulled her from combat rotations, reassigned her to transport missions and milk runs, and she had smiled through gritted teeth and waited. Waited for the day someone, somewhere, needed her badly enough that the rules wouldn't matter. Today was that day. She orbited the compound in a lazy figure eight, eyes scanning, mind calculating. The storm was easing slightly, visibility creeping up from impossible to merely terrible, and in the distance she could hear the chatter of a quick reaction force spinning up, Apache finally getting clearance to launch. They'd be here in 15 minutes. She just had to hold the line until then. Reaper, I've got movement northeast, 200 meters, looks like reinforcements trying to flank. I'm going to discourage them. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The A-10 nosed over into a shallow dive, and she let loose another burst from the cannon, walking the rounds across the hillside where the enemy fighters were scrambling for cover. Dust and stone exploded skyward and the movement stopped. She climbed back to altitude, breathing slow and even, and felt the plane respond to her touch like an extension of her body. This was what she had been born to do. Not the paperwork, not the politics, not the endless justifications and evaluations. This. Protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Being the monster that scared away the other monsters. The quick reaction force arrived in a thunder of rotor blades and rocket pods, two A-64 Apache that came in fast and mean, their pilots already coordinating with Alara over the tactical frequency. She handed off the target area with clipped professionalism, gave them the grid coordinates of remaining enemy positions, and climbed to a higher orbit. Her job wasn't done yet. Not until those SEALs were in the air and headed home. The lead Apache pilot, call sign Trigger, came over the radio with a drawl that placed him somewhere in Texas. Hog 2-3, appreciate the assist. Hell of a mess you cleaned up down here. Just keeping them warm for you, Trigger. They're all yours now. She watched the Apache make their gun runs, precise and devastating, and felt a strange emptiness settle over her. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving behind the familiar ache of exhaustion and the knowledge that she'd have to explain herself when she got back to base. She had launched without clearance, violated a dozen regulations, and flown into conditions that every manual said were prohibitive. But those 4 men would go home. That was the only math that mattered. The extraction bird, a fresh Black Hawk, swooped in under Apache cover and touched down just long enough for the SEALs to scramble aboard. Vale paused at the ramp, looked up into the storm, and keyed his radio one last time. Hog 2-3, we owe you everything. What's your actual name? I want to know who to thank. Alara hesitated. She was supposed to maintain operational security, keep things impersonal, but something in his voice made her answer honestly. Cade, Captain Alara Cade, call sign Revenant. Revenant. Vale repeated the word like a prayer. That's fitting. Thank you, Captain. The Black Hawk lifted off, rotors biting air, and disappeared into the dust. Alara turned her A-10 toward home, fuel gauge flashing amber warnings, and allowed herself a small smile. Revenant. The name had been given to her years ago, after a mission in Iraq where she'd limped back to base on one engine and fumes. Half her hydraulics shot out, and still landed the plane like she was parking a car. Someone in the squadron had joked that she came back from the dead, and the name stuck. The debrief room at Bagram Airfield was colder than it had any right to be, and the fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency that made Alara's skull ache. She sat in a metal chair, flight suit still damp with sweat, and faced 3 officers whose expressions ranged from furious to confused to reluctantly impressed. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove, her squadron commander, leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. He was 52, career Air Force, and had the look of a man who had aged a decade in the last hour. Captain Cade, do you have any idea how many regulations you violated today? Alara met his gaze without flinching. Approximately 17, sir, depending on how you classify gross insubordination versus creative interpretation of standing orders. A snort came from the corner of the room where Major Tessa Ruiz, the base JAG officer, stood with her arms crossed. Ruiz was sharp, unforgiving, and had a reputation for ending careers with paperwork, but there was something in her expression that looked almost like admiration. Creative interpretation, Ruiz repeated. That's a new one. Hargrove leaned forward, his voice dropping into a register that suggested he was trying very hard to remain professional. You launched without authorization, flew into weather conditions classified as prohibitive for all aircraft, engaged enemy forces without a forward air controller, and did all of this while you were explicitly grounded from combat operations pending review. Do you understand that I could court-martial you for this? Yes, sir. And yet you did it anyway. Yes, sir. Hargrove stared at her, then at the mission report on his desk, then back at her. 4 Navy SEALs are alive because of you. The SEAL team commander, Staff Sergeant Vale, has already submitted a recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Apache pilot said you held that position alone for nearly 12 minutes in conditions they wouldn't have attempted. How did you even see anything down there? Alara chose her words carefully. I didn't rely on visuals, sir. I used sound, radio reports, muzzle flash patterns, and terrain memory. The A-10's gun camera recorded everything. You can review it if you want confirmation. I already did. Hargrove tapped the screen of his tablet. It's the most insane piece of flying I've ever seen, and the most effective. Silence filled the room, heavy and expectant. Alara kept her face neutral, but inside her mind was racing through contingencies, through what might come next. She had known the risks when she launched, had known that saving those men might cost her career, but she would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Hargrove finally sighed, a long exhale that seemed to carry the weight of command. Captain Cade, you're officially reprimanded for launching without authorization. That goes in your file, non-negotiable. However, given the outcome and the extraordinary circumstances, I'm also recommending you for commendation. You're reinstated to full combat status effective immediately. Alara blinked. Sir, you heard me. Get out of my office before I change my mind. She stood, snapped a salute that was sharper than any she'd given in months, and turned to leave. Ruiz caught her at the door, voice low. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen, Cade. Maybe both. Alara allowed herself a small smile. I'll take both, ma'am. Outside, the Afghan sun was brutal and unforgiving, baking the tarmac until heat shimmers danced in the air. Alara walked toward the flight line where her A-10 sat, scorched and battered, surrounded by maintenance crews who were already swarming over it like ants. One of the crew chiefs, Master Sergeant Akafor, a Nigerian immigrant with hands scarred by a decade of wrenching on jets, looked up and grinned. Captain Cade, your bird took some hits, but she'll fly again. You know how to bring her home in one piece, I'll give you that. She's a good plane, Sergeant, takes care of me. Akafor patted the nose of the warthog, affectionate and reverent. She's more than that. She's a damn miracle, just like her pilot. Alara ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cold metal beneath her palm, the dents and scratches that told stories she'd never fully be able to explain. This plane had saved her as many times as she'd saved others. It was ugly, slow, outdated by modern standards, but it was loyal. It was hers, and she wasn't done flying it yet. Word spread through Bagram like wildfire. The way stories always do in places where danger is currency and bravery is the only coin worth trading. By nightfall, everyone from the Air Force to the Army infantry to the Navy Special Operations community knew the name Revenant. They knew a female A-10 pilot had flown into a sandstorm alone and pulled 4 SEALs out of a kill box that should have been their grave. In the SEAL team room, Marcus Vale sat with his legs stitched and bandaged, drinking terrible coffee and replaying the mission in his mind. Rodriguez was next to him, still riding the adrenaline high, talking fast. Sarge, did you see the way she came in? I mean, I couldn't see anything but the sound, that gun. It was like God himself decided to intervene. Vale nodded slowly. I've been doing this for 12 years, Rodriguez. I've worked with Air Force combat controllers, Marine Harriers, Navy Hornets, you name it. I have never, and I mean never, seen flying like that. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask for perfect conditions, just showed up and did the job. Another SEAL, Chief Petty Officer Langford, older and quieter, spoke from across the room. I looked her up. Captain Alara Cade. She's got a record that reads like fiction. Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, 300 combat missions. She's been shot down twice and brought the plane back both times. They call her Revenant because she refuses to stay dead. Rodriguez whistled low. Why the hell was she grounded? Politics, Vale said, the word bitter. Because some desk jockey decided women can't handle the stress of close air support even when her record proves otherwise. Langford grunted. That's the kind of thinking that gets people killed. If she hadn't ignored orders today, we'd be a statistic. Vale raised his coffee mug. To Revenant, may she never stop breaking rules. They drank in silence, and somewhere across the base, Alara sat alone in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. The mission replayed in her head in perfect detail, every decision, every burst of cannon fire, every second of doubt that she had buried beneath training and will. She thought about the SEALs, about their voices on the radio, desperate and steady at once. She thought about the A-10, battered but unbowed. And she thought about the long road that had brought her here. Alara Cade had not always been revenant. She had been a girl from rural Montana, daughter of a cattle rancher and a schoolteacher, who had looked up at the sky and decided that anywhere was better than the ground. She joined the Air Force at 18, scored high enough on the aptitude tests to qualify for pilot training, and spent the next decade proving herself in cockpits that men assumed she couldn't handle. Her first combat deployment had been Iraq in the surge years, flying convoy support missions where the margin for error was measured in seconds and the consequences of failure were measured in body bags. She had been good, better than good, and the old guard had hated her for it. They called her reckless, emotional, unstable. They wrote fitness reports that damned her with faint praise. But she kept flying, kept coming home, kept saving lives. And slowly, grudgingly, she earned respect. The call sign Revenant came after a mission outside Mosul, where her A-10 had taken ground fire that shredded her hydraulics and punctured a fuel tank. She should have ejected, should have abandoned the plane, but there were Marines on the ground who needed her, and she wasn't done yet. She had nursed the crippled Warthog back to base on emergency systems and willpower, landed it in a controlled crash that tore off the landing gear, and left the plane a smoking wreck on the runway. She had walked away without a scratch. Someone in the maintenance crew had muttered, "She's a damn revenant," and the name stuck. Now, lying in the dark, she wondered if the name was a blessing or a curse. People expected her to be invincible, to always come back, to always have the answer. But she was just a pilot, flesh and bone, and every mission brought her closer to the day when luck or skill or stubborn determination wouldn't be enough. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the dreams were always the same. Fire and noise and the radio voices of people she couldn't save. She woke before dawn, exhausted and wired, and went to the flight line to check on her plane. The sun was just breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. The A-10 sat on the tarmac, half disassembled, surrounded by tools and parts and the quiet competence of people who understood machines. Master Sergeant Akafer saw her approaching and waved her over, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had probably never been clean. "Captain, you're up early, or did you not sleep?" "Bit of both, Sergeant." Alara studied the plane, taking in the damage. Bullet holes stitched across the wings, one engine cowling cracked, the nose cone scratched and dented. It looked like it had been through a war, which was accurate. "How bad is it?" Akafer shrugged, the gesture philosophical. "Bad enough. We've got to replace the entire hydraulic system on the port side, patch about 30 holes, and swap out one of the turbofan blades. But she'll fly. She always does." "How long?" 72 hours, maybe less if we skip sleep. "Which we will, because nobody on this crew wants to be the reason you're grounded." Alara felt a surge of gratitude that she couldn't quite put into words. These men and women didn't care about politics or regulations or who thought she should or shouldn't be flying. They cared about the mission, about keeping the plane in the air, about making sure that when the next crisis came, she'd be ready. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Don't thank me, Captain. Just keep bringing her home." She spent the morning helping with the repairs, not because she had to, but because it felt right. She handed tools, held panels, listened to the crew chiefs talk about their families and their frustrations and their hopes. It was grounding in a way that nothing else was. These were the people who made everything possible, who turned wrecks into warbirds, who believed in her when the rest of the world didn't. By midday, the heat was oppressive, and Alara retreated to the shade of a hangar to drink water and check her messages. There was an email from her father, brief and unsentimental, asking if she was safe. There was a message from her younger brother, a Marine infantryman stationed in Kandahar, congratulating her on the mission and calling her a show-off. And there was a message from an address she didn't recognize, routed through official channels, with a subject line that read simply, "Thank you." She opened it. The message was from Staff Sergeant Marcus Vale. It was short, direct, the kind of writing that came from someone who had learned to be economical with words. The message read, "Captain Cade, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to send it. You saved my life and the lives of my team. I've been a SEAL for over a decade, and I've seen a lot of courage, but what you did yesterday was something else. You flew into conditions that everyone said were impossible, and you did it without hesitation. My men and I will carry that with us for the rest of our lives. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you have 4 brothers who will drop everything to help. Semper Fi doesn't just belong to Marines. It belongs to anyone who lives it. Thank you. Marcus Vale, Staff Sergeant, SEAL Team 6. Alara read it twice, then a third time, and felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent so long fighting to prove herself, to justify her existence in a world that didn't want her, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be simply, straightforwardly appreciated. She typed a response, kept it brief. Sergeant Vale, I was just doing my job. I'm glad you're safe. Take care of your team. Captain Alara Cade, USAF. She hit send and leaned back against the cool metal of the hangar wall, staring out at the flight line. The A-10s sat in rows, ugly and ungainly, built for a war that everyone said was obsolete. But they were still here, still flying, still saving lives. Just like her. That afternoon, she was summoned to the operations center for a mission briefing. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove was there, along with a half-dozen other pilots and a liaison from Joint Special Operations Command. The liaison was a Navy commander named Fisher, lean and sunburned, with the look of someone who had spent too many years in places without names. Captain Cade, Fisher began, your actions yesterday have not gone unnoticed. JSOC has requested your direct support for an upcoming operation. High-value target deep in enemy territory, and the weather forecast looks a lot like what you flew through yesterday. Interested? Alara glanced at Hargrove, who gave her a small nod. Permission. Trust. What's the target? Fisher slid a folder across the table. Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. Intel says he's meeting with foreign fighters in a compound near the Pakistan border. Small window of opportunity. We need someone who can operate in adverse conditions and make split-second decisions. Alara opened the folder, scanned the photographs and maps and intelligence summaries. It was a nightmare of terrain and timing, the kind of mission that could go sideways in 100 different ways. She looked up at Fisher and said, I'm in. The operation was scheduled for 48 hours later, which gave her just enough time to study the terrain, memorize the radio frequencies, and run mental simulations of every scenario she could imagine. She worked late into the night, hunched over maps and satellite imagery, tracing routes and calculating fuel margins and weapon loads. The other pilots in her squadron watched her with a mixture of respect and wariness. She had always been different, intense in a way that made people uncomfortable, but after the SEAL rescue, that intensity had taken on a mythic quality. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was Revenant, the woman who flew into storms and came back alive. On the morning of the mission, she walked to the flight line in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying her helmet and survival vest, and found Master Sergeant Akaffer waiting by her plane. The A-10 gleamed under the floodlights, freshly repaired, every panel secured, every system tested. She's ready, Captain, Akaffer said. And so are you. Alara ran her pre-flight checks with the automatic precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times, but her mind was elsewhere, cycling through the mission parameters, the radio calls, the contingencies. The target was a fortified compound in a valley surrounded by mountains, accessible only through a narrow pass that would funnel her into a kill zone if the enemy was alert. The SEALs and Afghan commandos would be inserted by helicopter under cover of darkness, hit the compound fast, and extract before reinforcements arrived. Her job was to provide cover, suppress enemy positions, and ensure nothing interfered with the extraction. Simple in theory, chaos in practice. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and powered up the systems. The familiar hum of electronics, the glow of instruments, the weight of responsibility. She took a deep breath and keyed the radio. Tower Hog 23 ready for taxi. Hog 23 cleared to taxi runway 27. Winds light and variable. Good hunting. She taxied into position, ran the engine checks, and waited for clearance. The sky above was scattered with stars, indifferent and eternal. She thought about the men she was about to support, about the risks they were taking, about the lives that hung in the balance. Then she pushed the throttles forward and left the ground behind. The flight to the target area took 30 minutes. a low-level route through mountain passes that kept her below radar coverage and out of sight from enemy observers. Alara flew with her navigation lights off, relying on night vision goggles that turned the world into shades of green and gray. The A-10 responded to her touch with familiar stubbornness, heavy and stable, immune to the turbulence that rattled other aircraft. She checked in with the JSOC command element, a calm voice from an operations center hundreds of miles away. Hog 2-3, this is Overwatch. Insertion team is on target. Expect contact in approximately 4 minutes. Copy, Overwatch standing by. She orbited at 5,000 feet, high enough to avoid small arms fire, low enough to respond quickly. Below, invisible in the darkness, the SEALs and Afghan commandos were moving through the compound, clearing rooms, securing the target. Then the radio exploded with chatter. Contact, contact, we're taking fire from the north building. RPG, RPG, get down. Overwatch, this is ground element, we are heavily engaged. Request immediate close air support. Alara didn't wait for formal clearance. She rolled the A-10 into a dive, lining up on the coordinates and toggled her targeting pod. The infrared camera showed figures moving, muzzle flashes, the chaotic geometry of combat. Ground element, Hog 2-3. I have eyes on. Confirm north building is hostile. Affirm north building is hostile. We have friendlies in the south courtyard. Danger close. Danger close. The words every close air support pilot dreaded and lived for. It meant firing so near to friendly forces that the margin for error was measured in meters. One mistake, one miscalculation, and she'd kill the people she was trying to save. She armed the cannon, adjusted her dive angle, and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared, a sound that drowned out thought, and the north building disintegrated under a hail of 30mm fire. Stone and wood and human bodies became indistinguishable debris. She pulled up hard, climbing back to altitude, and keyed the radio. North building neutralized. Give me the next target. Hog, we've got technical vehicles approaching from the east, approximately 1 click out. They're moving fast. I see them. Stand by. She wheeled around, searching for the heat signatures, and found them. 3 pickup trucks racing toward the compound. Alara toggled through her weapon systems, assessing options with the speed of long practice. Mavericks were overkill for soft-skinned vehicles, and she wanted to conserve them for hardened targets. Hydra rockets were the right tool, unguided but devastating if aimed correctly. She nosed the A-10 into a shallow dive, lined up the lead vehicle, and pickled off 2 rockets. White contrails streaked through the darkness, beautiful and deadly, and impacted with precision that bordered on art. The lead technical exploded, flipping end over end, and the 2 trailing vehicles swerved wildly, drivers panicking. She fired again, another pair of rockets, and the second vehicle erupted in flames. The third technical skidded to a stop and began revering, trying to escape, but Alara was already adjusting her aim. A short burst from the cannon, 2 seconds, and the truck disintegrated. Ground element, threats neutralized. You're clear for extract. Copy, Hog, we're moving now. 30 seconds to exfil. She climbed back to altitude and orbited the compound, watching through her targeting pod as the SEALs and commandos sprinted to the waiting helicopters, carrying the high-value target between them. The Black Hawks lifted off in a storm of dust and rotor wash, climbing fast, and Alara stayed overhead, guardian angel in titanium and fire. Hog 2-3, this is Overwatch. Mission successful. Target is secured, no friendly casualties. You're cleared to return to base. Copy, Overwatch. Hog 2-3 is RTB. She turned toward home, feeling the adrenaline begin to ebb, replaced by the hollow exhaustion that always followed combat. She had done her job. The mission was a success, but there was no joy in it, only the quiet satisfaction of competence and the knowledge that tomorrow, or the day after, she'd have to do it again. The sun was rising as she approached Bagram, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. She landed the A-10 gently, almost tenderly, and taxied to the flight line where the maintenance crews were waiting. Master Sergeant Akafer met her as she climbed out of the cockpit, grinning. "Another flawless return, Captain. You're making us look good." Alara pulled off her helmet, her hair matted with sweat, and managed a tired smile. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." "Yeah, well, keep doing it. We need pilots like you." The commendation ceremony was held 2 weeks later in a hangar that had been swept clean and decorated with flags that snapped in the wind. Officers in dress uniforms stood in neat rows, and a small crowd of enlisted personnel watched from the sides. Alara stood at attention in her service dress, feeling awkward and out of place. She preferred the cockpit to podiums, preferred action to speeches. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove read the citation, his voice carrying across the hangar. For extraordinary heroism in aerial combat, Captain Alara Cade is awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. On the night of August 17th, Captain Cade flew into prohibitive weather conditions to provide close air support for a besieged SEAL team, engaging enemy forces with exceptional skill and courage. Her actions directly resulted in the safe extraction of 4 friendly personnel and the neutralization of significant enemy threats. Her bravery and professionalism reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Air Force. The medal was pinned to her chest, a small piece of metal that represented risk and fear and the impossible decisions that defined combat. She shook hands with officers she barely knew, accepted congrats,